Thank you for coming out, being a part of Life Point, and sticking with it. Sometimes the hardest thing is to just be consistent in our lives, right? To just stick with things. And so I'm glad that you're a part of Life Point tonight, and you've been on this journey together. We've been talking about the art of neighboring, but along with it, we've been talking about a block party that we've been planning and strategizing on in a neighborhood, whether it's your neighborhood or one that you've chosen from someone in the group. But so we've been talking about this block party, and by now, you should have already had your location and your time nailed down, and you should have already taken that list of supplies and responsibilities and divvied it up among your group, and so everyone knows what they're supposed to do. If you haven't done it, everyone's sweating right now. Oh, we didn't do it. Get it done. And then tonight, you are going to receive the invitations. The block party invitations came in, and so they're all the same. Every group is going to have the same one. The difference is on the back side, there's a spot for the date and time and the location. Make sure that you, after tonight, sometime either tonight or this week, that you guys take some time and fill out each one of these. It's going to take a marker. You can't write on with a pen because it won't. It's got a UV coating on it. But fill out the date, the time, and where your block party is going to take place, whether it's an address or whatever. Make sure you do those, and then you're going to be distributing. You won't be distributing them in the neighborhood yet, but go ahead and get those things done, and that'll help us get prepared for our block party. We're excited about what God is going to do. This morning I finished a message, talked about compassion, and how in the story that we've been going through in Luke chapter 10, the story of the Good Samaritan, there were two religious leaders. There was the priest and the Levite that went over to the other side of the road, avoided the man who was in the ditch, who was bloody, beaten, naked, and avoided him. But the Samaritan, it says he had compassion. And that compassion moved him to do something. And so we talked about motives and how sometimes we lose compassion. Sometimes our compassion, maybe there was a point in your life where you really felt it. Maybe right now you're really feeling it. But maybe there are others in the group that are like, I'm enjoying the fellowship and stuff, but I'm not really feeling the compassion thing. I want to encourage you. It's not because something's broken inside of you. It's not because you're a bad person and everybody with compassion is a good person. Here's what happens, is when we forget the grace of God in our lives, then compassion dissipates. We lose compassion. And so grace, we talked about Sunday, grace is the mother of compassion. Grace is what births compassion in our hearts. And so maybe if you're at a place where you're like, I'm not really feeling it, let me encourage you to remember where you've come from. Remember what God has done in your life, how He's forgiven you, how He's rescued you, how He's redeemed you. When you start to remember what God has done in your life and that you don't deserve it, you don't deserve anything that God has done for you, but He does it. He does it out of His love for us, and that's the grace. That's what we're talking about. Some have described it as an acrostic, God's riches at Christ's expense. It's what Jesus did for us. And when we remember that, it becomes a fountainhead. It becomes like a source of compassion. Understanding that grace, understanding what God has done for us. And so it's that compassion that then drives us or moves us to love people. See, we don't love people out of fear, out of guilt, out of shame, because the Bible says, and Jesus said you're supposed to love people. That's not the right motive. Some of you maybe have at different stages of life have kind of that's been your motivation, but that's not a healthy motivation. See, the trick is, and the important thing is getting the right motivation in our life. If we have the right motives, we can really accomplish anything God puts inside of our hearts. So that compassion, it moves us to love people, but also that compassion transforms you and I into unlikely heroes. We talked about Winston Churchill. I shared a little bit of my story. We talked about David, how David, his own father didn't even expect him to be picked by the prophet. But God saw something in him. And I want to encourage you, God sees something in you that maybe you don't see. I'm sure you don't see it yourself. Those around you may not see it as well, but God sees it. And the compassion that he wants to stir inside of your heart and move you is going to be the compassion that he uses to transform you into an unlikely hero. I said something Sunday that I believe every one of us is called. We're called. So the question isn't whether you and I are called to ministry. The question is, how far will you run with it? How far will you go with it? Because if you will follow compassion, God will take you to places you never dreamed. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what you've done. God will work through and use compassion to move you and transform you into an unlikely hero. So as you go into your question time tonight, I want to encourage you to focus in on grace. Focus in on what God has done for you. That's our motive. It's that compassion that moves us. Excited about what God's going to do through you. God bless you.